Harper Voss was on her knees in a restaurant parking lot, tasting blood, when she finally did the one thing she'd promised herself she would never do again. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it into the gravel. Above her, the neon sign for Rose's kitchen buzzed pink and gold, throwing light across the puddle she was kneeling in. Somewhere behind the brick wall, she could still hear her family laughing, could still hear her sister Delilah's fiancé telling a joke about airline food, completely unaware that 20 feet away, Harper's husband had just backhanded her hard enough to split her lip. Caleb was gone. He'd straightened his jacket, told her to fix her face and come back inside before anyone noticed, and walked back through the side door like a man returning from a phone call. That was the part that scared her most. How easy it was for him. 3 years ago, Harper had deleted a number from her phone because she wanted a normal life. Safe one. A life where nobody had to duck when a car backfired, where nobody's protection came wrapped in violence. She had gotten the normal life. She just hadn't understood until tonight that normal could still leave her bleeding on wet gravel with nobody coming. She still remembered the number by heart. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. If she made this call, there was no undoing it. She could already hear Caleb's voice in her head, calm and reasonable, the way he always sounded once the damage was done. "You're overreacting. You know how you get." She dialed anyway. Rang twice. Harper. Not a question. He'd kept her name saved, too. She opened her mouth and nothing came out at first. 3 years of silence trying to become one sentence. "Nathaniel." Her voice cracked on the second syllable. "Can you come get me?" There was a pause on the line, brief enough that a stranger wouldn't have caught it. Then his voice came back low, flat, and utterly certain. The voice of a man who had already stood up and was already moving. "Where are you?" Not why. Not what happened. Not "I told you this would happen." It was where. Rose's kitchen. The back lot. She swallowed blood and rain. "Nathaniel, I don't have long. He's going to. Stay where you are. Don't go back inside." "I'm coming." The line went dead. Harper sat in the gravel, coat soaked through, phone clutched against her chest like it might disappear if she let go, and did the only thing left to do. She counted the minutes. At minute 17, headlights swung into the lot, cutting the dark in half, and a car door opened before the engine had even fully stopped. To understand why Harper Voss was sitting in that parking lot instead of walking away years earlier, you had to understand what her life actually looked like from the outside. From the outside it looked good. She worked 6 days a week at Rose's Kitchen, the small Italian restaurant her parents, Frank and Rosa Quinn, had built from nothing on the edge of downtown. Harper had waited tables there since she was 16, and she was good at it in a way that had nothing to do with balancing plates. She could read a room from the doorway, who was about to fight, who needed their coffee refilled before they asked, who was hiding something behind a menu. Regulars asked for her section by name. Her mother liked to say Harper could talk a hurricane into behaving itself. 2 years ago she'd married Caleb Voss, a 31-year-old ER surgeon with an easy smile and a reputation for staying late with patients who had nobody else. Her parents adored him. Delilah, her younger sister, called him the good one, the man who'd finally convinced Harper to slow down, to let someone take care of her for once. At the wedding, her father had given a toast about how relieved he was that Harper had finally chosen safety over excitement. Everyone had laughed. Harper had smiled along, holding a glass of champagne she wasn't sure she was allowed to finish, already learning to count how many sips looked appropriate in front of Caleb's colleagues. What nobody saw was the version of Caleb that came out once the front door closed. It never started with hitting. It started with control. Which restaurant shifts she was allowed to pick up, who she was allowed to have coffee with, how long a phone call to her mother was permitted to run before he wanted to know why. It started with him managing her bank account so she wouldn't have to worry about it, and somehow every dollar she earned went into an account only he could access. By the time it became physical, 8 months into the marriage, Harper had already stopped believing anyone would take her word over his. Caleb was, on paper, exactly the kind of man people trusted instinctively. Steady hands, a hospital badge, a habit of remembering nurses' kids' names. Caleb was also, quietly, 3 weeks away from a vote that would make him chief of surgery at St. Aldrich Memorial, the youngest in the hospital's history. He talked about it constantly. He needed the board to see a stable home, a devoted wife, a life with no cracks in it. Harper had learned to be that wife the way she'd learned to carry 4 plates at once, through repetition, through fear of what happened if she dropped something. Before Caleb, there had been someone else. Nathaniel Cross ran the docks on the east side of the city, and half of what moved through them without anyone official noticing. He was 35, sharp-eyed, and about as far from safe as a person could get. Harper had met him during a bad year, when Rose's kitchen was 3 months from losing its lease and a debt collector wouldn't stop calling her father. Nathaniel had made the debt collector stop calling. He hadn't explained how, and Harper hadn't asked. For 11 months she'd loved him anyway, carefully, guiltily, the way you love something you know you can't keep. He remembered her coffee order after the first time. He never once raised his voice at her, never once told her what to wear or who to talk to, and for a while that felt like enough to build a life on. Then she'd watched him solve a different problem, one involving a man who owed him money, in a way she couldn't unsee. Nathaniel hadn't laid a hand on her, but she understood in that moment exactly what kind of protection came from him, and exactly what it might one day cost the people around him. She remembered driving home that night with her hands shaking on the wheel, telling herself it wasn't her business, telling herself it would never touch her directly. She hadn't believed herself even then. So she left. She wanted a life built on doors that opened because someone knocked politely, not because someone made a threat go away in the dark. She got Caleb instead. Tonight was Delilah's engagement dinner. 20 people crowded into Rose's kitchen's private room. Champagne Harper wasn't allowed a second glass of, her mother crying happy tears into a napkin. Caleb had been charming all evening, refilling glasses, laughing at his future brother-in-law's jokes. Then Harper had complimented the bartender's playlist, and something in Caleb's jaw had gone tight and still. She'd felt the dread settle into her stomach before she understood why. She'd felt it 100 times before, that particular stillness in his jaw, that half-second delay before he smiled again. It always meant the same thing. She glanced across the private room at her mother, glowing with pride, refilling glasses for a toast. At Delilah, laughing too loud, sliding a ring back and forth on her finger like she couldn't believe it was real. At her father, already half a glass into telling the story of how Rose's kitchen had started as a single folding table on a sidewalk. None of them saw what Harper saw. None of them had learned to read the room the way 3 years of waiting tables, and 2 years of marriage, had taught her to. It meant that somewhere between the tiramisu and the toasts, Caleb was going to find a reason to get her alone. The reason came 20 minutes later, when Caleb leaned down and murmured that he needed her help carrying the extra champagne in from his car. Harper knew better than to refuse in front of her family. Refusing would have looked strange, and strange was dangerous. She smiled, said of course, and set her napkin down like nothing in the world was wrong. She followed him out through the side door into the parking lot, where the street light buzzed and the November air smelled like rain about to start. Behind her, through the closing door, she could still hear Delilah's laugh, bright and unbothered, and some part of Harper wanted to turn around and stay in that sound instead of stepping into the cold. She didn't. She never did. Turning back always cost more than walking forward. "You've had 2 glasses," Caleb said, once the door had swung shut behind them. His voice was pleasant, conversational, the voice he used for patients' families. "I counted. It's my sister's engagement, Caleb. And you spent the whole night looking at Marcus like he was interesting." Marcus was the bartender. 22 years old, engaged himself, currently pouring drinks 8 feet from where they stood. "Do you know what people think, watching my wife flirt at her own sister's party?" I asked him about a song. Harper kept her voice level, the way she'd trained herself to. Level voices ended arguments faster. That's all that happened. That's not what it looked like. "Caleb, please, not tonight. Not here." He smiled, the smile she'd once mistaken for warmth, the one that made nurses trust him with their worst days. Up close, in the dark, it looked like something else entirely. "You're right," he said. "Not here." Harper's stomach dropped the way it always did in the half-second before things turned. She tried one last time to talk them both down. "Caleb, it's Delilah's night. Can we please just go back inside and finish this at home, calmly like adults?" "We will finish this," Caleb said. "Exactly where I decide to finish it." He took her by the arm, not gently, not a guiding touch, a grip that would leave 4 fingerprint bruises she'd have to explain away later, and walked her around the corner of the building, out of the streetlight's reach, out of anyone's sightline from inside. "I have 3 weeks left before that board vote," he said, low and fast now, all pretense gone. 3 weeks. "And you cannot give anyone a single reason to think there's a crack in this. Do you understand me? I didn't do anything." The back of his hand caught her across the jaw before she finished the sentence. She hit the brick wall, slid, and ended up on her knees in the gravel, the world ringing white for a second before it came back sharp and cold and wet. Somewhere far away, muffled by brick and glass, she could still hear the party going on without her. A toast, a burst of laughter, glasses clinking together in celebration of a future her sister still believed could be simple. Caleb crouched down in front of her, and for one terrible moment his voice went almost gentle. "Fix your face. Come back in 10 minutes and tell your mother you tripped on the curb. If anyone at that board hearing hears one whisper that my marriage isn't solid, Harper, I promise you, you will regret it far worse than this." He stood, straightened his jacket cuffs, and that was when Harper saw it. His watch. A slim gold thing she'd never seen before, catching the streetlight as he adjusted it. Engraved on the back, visible for half a second as he turned his wrist, to CV for making room. R.H. Richard Hale, chairman of the hospital board. The man whose vote would decide Caleb's promotion. For making room. Harper had heard those words before, from a nurse complaining months ago about a patient bumped off a transplant list for someone with better insurance, someone connected. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. She thought everything of it now. Caleb walked back through the side door like nothing had happened, straight into the sound of her family's laughter. Harper stayed on her knees in the gravel, blood in her mouth, watch engraving burned into her memory, and understood 2 things with sudden, terrible clarity. The first was that if she went back through that door tonight, smiled, said she'd tripped, and let this become one more thing nobody talked about, there would be no bottom to this. 3 weeks would become 3 years. The bruises would get better at hiding. The second was that she was, for the first time, holding something Caleb couldn't explain away. What? An engraving. Name. She thought about calling her father. He'd storm out here and get himself hurt or arrested defending her, and Caleb would spin it into proof that her family was unstable, embarrassing, exactly the kind of crack he'd warned her about. She thought about her mother's face if the party ended in sirens instead of a toast, and how Caleb would somehow still be the one comforting everyone by the end of the night. She thought about calling the police. She'd tried that once, quietly, 11 months into the marriage. The responding officer had shaken Caleb's hand on the way out and told Harper she was lucky to have a husband who cared so much. She remembered sitting on the bathroom floor afterward, understanding for the first time that a badge and a smile could look identical from the outside, and that nobody was going to save her by accident. There was only one number left in the world that she knew, with total certainty, would not ask her to be reasonable, would not ask her to wait, would not require her to prove anything before showing up. She had deleted it 3 years ago. She still remembered every digit. Her hands were shaking so hard it took her 3 tries to unlock the phone. She pressed call, and for the first time since she'd watched Nathaniel Cross's world do something she couldn't unsee. Harper Voss chose the danger she understood over the one she didn't. 17 minutes after her call connected, Harper watched 2 dark trucks swing into the lot, tires cutting through standing water, and Nathaniel Cross was out of the lead vehicle before it had finished rocking to a stop. He crossed the gravel in long, fast strides, and when he saw her face in the streetlight, the split lip, the bruise already blooming along her jaw, something moved behind his eyes that Harper had only seen once before, the night the debt collector had called her father a 3rd time in one day. 2 more men climbed out of the second truck and stayed back near the vehicles, saying nothing, watching the doorway rather than Harper. A kind of quiet, practiced vigilance she hadn't seen up close in 3 years and had almost forgotten existed. He didn't ask what happened. He knelt in front of her, careful, like she might shatter if he moved too fast, and shrugged out of his coat to put it around her shoulders. Up close, his hands weren't quite steady either, though his voice never wavered. "I'm here," he said. "You're not staying here another minute. Nathaniel, can you stand?" She could, with his hand steady under her elbow, and that was when the side door banged open and Caleb stepped out, phone still in hand, mid-sentence to whoever he'd been texting. He stopped dead when he saw the trucks, when he saw the men standing near them, when he saw Nathaniel's hand on his wife's arm. "Get away from her," Caleb said, recovering fast, the ER doctor authority sliding back into his voice like a mask clicking into place. "Harper, come inside. You're clearly not well, you're confused." "She's not confused," Nathaniel said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She's bleeding. This is a family matter. I don't know who you think you are." "I think," Nathaniel said, stepping just slightly in front of Harper, "that you're the man who put those marks on her arm. And I think you should consider very carefully what you say to me in the next 30 seconds. Caleb's eyes darted toward the side door, calculating whether raising his voice would bring witnesses out to help him or expose him further. He chose silence briefly before trying reason again. "Harper is my wife," he said, aiming for calm and missing by a visible margin. "Whatever she's told you, there are 2 sides to every disagreement between a husband and a wife. There's one side to a broken lip," Nathaniel said. Caleb's eyes flicked to the men by the trucks, did some quick arithmetic, and his voice dropped its authority for something closer to panic dressed up as reason. "You have no right. She's not your property to keep quiet," Nathaniel said. "She's leaving. Tonight. And if you come near her again, you and I are going to have a very different conversation." Caleb's jaw worked. For 1 second, Harper watched the mask slip completely, watched the fear underneath it, not fear for her, but fear of exposure, fear of the board vote, fear of anything that might crack the surface he'd spent years polishing. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," Caleb said, quieter now. "I have 3 weeks before I'm chief of surgery at St. Aldrich. You think anyone is going to believe a story from a criminal and his wife over me?" "She's not my wife," Nathaniel said. "She's her own person. That's the part you never understood." He turned Harper gently toward the trucks. Caleb didn't follow. He stood frozen in the doorway, doing the math on exposure versus retreat, and retreat won. He went back inside, already reaching for his phone. In the truck, once the doors were shut and the world outside had gone quiet, Nathaniel's calm cracked for the first time. "Give me a name," he said. "Just his name and where he'll be tomorrow. That's all I need." Harper went very still. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about making sure he never does this again. To you or anyone else." Harper looked at him, at the flat certainty in his face, and understood he wasn't exaggerating or posturing. He meant it exactly as plainly as he'd said it. "Nathaniel." She said his name like a warning. "No. Harper." "I said no." Her voice shook, but it held. "I didn't call you so you could disappear my problem. I called you because I needed someone to get me out of that lot." He was quiet for a long moment, jaw tight, hands flexed on the steering wheel like he was holding something back by force. "You have no idea what he's capable of. Men like that don't stop because a piece of paper tells them to. And men like you don't stop solving problems with your hands because it's faster." She held his gaze even though her whole body was shaking. "I left you once because I was afraid of exactly this. Don't make me regret calling you tonight the same way." He looked away first, out the windshield, at the rain starting to streak the glass. "There's something you should know," he said finally, voice lower now, rougher around the edges. 2 years ago. One of my men, Ruiz. Good kid, loyal, been with me since he was 20. His father came into St. Aldrich with chest pain. Died 6 hours later. Paperwork mix-up, they called it. Wrong medication logged, then quietly corrected in the file after the fact, like it had never happened at all. Harper felt something cold settle in her stomach. Caleb. I never confirmed it was him. Ruiz wanted to go to the papers, wanted a lawyer, wanted somebody to answer for it. I told him to let it go. Told him lawsuits against hospitals take years and go nowhere, and I'd make sure his family didn't need the money anyway. Nathaniel's hands tightened on the wheel. I paid off the funeral and I buried the complaint instead of the truth. I told myself I was protecting Ruiz from a fight he couldn't win. Harper watched his face while he spoke, the way his jaw tightened around the word buried, and understood this confession was costing him something he didn't often let show. You knew, Harper said slowly, and you let him keep his job, his reputation, his board vote. I didn't know it was him for certain. Not until tonight, seeing his face. Nathaniel's voice was flat with something that might have been shame. I've spent 3 weeks, the same 3 weeks he's been counting down, telling myself it wasn't my business. Harper sat with that, the rain drumming harder on the roof, her own bruised jaw throbbing in time with her pulse. So we're both a little late, she said finally. But I'm not leaving this to disappear quietly. Not this time. Not for either of us. She let herself sit with what he'd just told her. A dead man, a buried complaint, a debt paid in silence instead of justice, and felt the old familiar pull to comfort him out of it, the waitress instinct to smooth over an uncomfortable moment before it curdled. She made herself resist it this time. You don't get absolution from me for that, she said quietly. That's not mine to give. But I hear you telling me, and that matters more than you staying quiet about it would have. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Caleb's name on the screen, a text already coming through even though it had been less than 10 minutes. You have until morning to come home. Or I make sure your parents lose that restaurant's lease by Friday. Harper turned the screen toward Nathaniel without a word. By morning, Harper had a split lip covered badly with concealer, a change of clothes borrowed from a spare room in a house she'd never seen before, and a plan that was already falling apart. She'd slept maybe 2 hours, jolting awake twice at sounds that turned out to be nothing. A car door down the street, a floorboard settling somewhere in the unfamiliar house. Nathaniel had given her the room without being asked twice about it, had shown her where the lock was, and hadn't come near the door again all night. It was such a small thing. Felt enormous. The plan had been simple. Find whoever else Caleb had leverage over, find whoever knew about the transplant list, whoever had seen his temper up close in a place with witnesses. Someone who could corroborate more than a bruise and a watch engraving. Nathaniel had a name by 9 a.m. Denise Marsh, 12 years an ER nurse at St. Aldrich, the charge nurse on shift the night Ruiz's father had died. According to 2 of Nathaniel's contacts inside the hospital, Denise had filed an internal complaint about Caleb's treatment of staff 8 months ago. The complaint had gone nowhere. Denise still worked there, still under Caleb, still silent. Harper wanted to talk to her directly, not send anyone in her place. Nathaniel didn't like it. A hospital parking garage in daylight, with Caleb possibly still on shift, but he'd promised to let her lead, and for once he kept a step back and let her walk in alone. Denise Marsh was maybe 50, tired around the eyes in the particular way of someone who'd worked too many double shifts, scrubs still creased from a 12-hour rotation, a travel mug of coffee gone cold in her hand. She recognized Harper immediately from a hospital fundraiser photo on Caleb's office wall, the smiling wife standing a half step behind her husband, the way Harper had learned to stand in every photograph for 2 years. You're his wife, she said, not unkindly, already backing toward her car. I can't talk to you. I need this job. I'm not here to get you in trouble, Harper said. I'm here because I think he's done to you what he's been doing to me, and I think you're the only person who might actually be believed. Something flickered in Denise's face. Recognition, maybe, or exhaustion finally cracking. You have no idea what that man is capable of protecting. I have some idea, Harper said quietly. I filed a complaint about him 8 months ago, Denise admitted, softer now, glancing around the garage like the concrete pillars themselves might be listening. About how he talks to staff, How he moves patients around on the surgical schedule without explaining why. It went into a drawer somewhere. Nobody called me back. You learn pretty fast what happens to people who make noise in that building. Denise studied her bruised jaw, and for a second Harper thought she'd finally found someone willing to help. Then Denise's expression hardened instead. You know who else showed up at my house last month? 2 men. Told my boyfriend he had 30 days to pay back a loan he never should have taken from your friend's people, or things would get complicated. I know exactly who you drove here with. I watched you two get out of that truck. Harper's stomach dropped. Nathaniel's men did that. Cross's men, yeah. So forgive me if I don't feel real inclined to trust anyone standing next to him. Denise's keys were already in her hand. I've got enough danger in my life without adding more of it on your behalf. She got in her car and drove off before Harper could say another word. Harper stood in the garage a long moment, the taste of failure sharp in her mouth, watching Denise's taillights disappear down the ramp, and thought about how close she'd just come to an actual ally before losing her over something that had nothing to do with Caleb at all. She went to find Nathaniel waiting 3 levels down, exactly where he'd promised to stay, leaning against the truck with his arms crossed, reading her face before she said a word. She won't talk, Harper said. Because of you. Because of what exactly? Your men went after her boyfriend over a debt. Threatened him. You didn't tell me that. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. That's business. It has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. Harper's voice cracked, not from fear this time, but from something closer to grief. You want me to trust that you'll protect people, but the second I go looking for someone brave enough to stand next to me, I find out you're the reason they're too scared. I didn't put those bruises on your face, Harper. No. But you've been putting fear on other people's faces for years, and I let myself forget that because you were gentle with me. She wiped angrily at her eyes. I left you once because I watched what your protection actually costs. I'm standing here watching it again. It's not the same thing, Harper. A debt is a debt. What Caleb did to you is exactly the same instinct, Harper cut in. Someone gets in your way and you decide on your own without asking them what happens next. You didn't ask Ruiz if he wanted the complaint buried. You didn't ask Denise's boyfriend if he wanted your men on his doorstep. You didn't ask me in that truck last night, before you offered to make my husband disappear. Nathaniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For a long moment, Nathaniel said nothing. The parking garage hummed with fluorescent light and distant traffic. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual certainty. You're right, he said. I've spent 15 years believing that if I control every variable, nobody I care about gets hurt. It's how I kept my mother's building from being demolished when I was 19. It's how I kept your father's restaurant open. It's also how I buried a dead man's complaint and let a debt collector scare a nurse's boyfriend half to death, because it was faster than doing it any other way. He looked at her, something unguarded in his face for the first time since he'd knelt beside her in the gravel. I don't know how to fix that by tomorrow. But I can stop doing it starting today, if you'll tell me how. Start with Denise, Harper said finally. Not an apology that sounds like damage control. Real one. And then we figure out how to get her records in front of people who can't just close a drawer on them a second time. I can do that, Nathaniel said. It won't undo what my men did to her boyfriend. But I can do that much. Harper's phone rang before she could answer. Her mother's name on the screen, voice already tight with panic when she picked up. Harper, honey, the landlord just called. He says our lease is being terminated, effective in 5 days. Some zoning violation nobody's ever mentioned before. Harper, what is going on? Is this because of Caleb? Harper closed her eyes, the parking garage swaying slightly around her. 5 days suddenly feeling like no time at all. I'll explain everything, Mom, she said. I promise. Just don't sign anything yet. She hung up and looked at Nathaniel, who had already gone very still, already recalculating, already looking like a man ready to make 3 weeks of problems disappear the fast way. Don't, Harper said before he could offer. Whatever you're about to say. Don't. Then tell me what you want instead. Harper wiped the last of the tears off her face, feeling something steady settle into her chest for the first time in 2 years. Not safety yet, but resolve, which was close enough to build on. I want you to help me do this the right way, she said. Even if it's slower. Even if it's harder. Starting with going back and apologizing to a woman whose boyfriend you scared half to death. To his credit, Nathaniel didn't argue. That afternoon, Harper watched him do something she suspected he had never once done in 15 years of running the docks. He showed up at Denise Marsh's boyfriend's auto shop, alone, unarmed, and apologized. Not through an intermediary. Not with a payoff attached. He called off the debt collection entirely in person, and told the man plainly that it had been handled wrong and that it wouldn't happen again. Harper stood by the truck, out of earshot but close enough to watch, and saw the boyfriend's shoulders drop half an inch. Not trust, not yet, but the particular relief of a threat finally, actually lifting. It was such a small gesture, and it had taken Nathaniel 15 years to learn how to make it. Cost him. Harper watched 2 of his own men exchange a look in the truck afterward, the look of people recalculating what kind of boss they worked for. Nathaniel noticed the look too, and didn't explain himself to them, which told Harper something about how much it actually cost. Denise didn't forgive instantly. But 3 days later, when Harper came back to the hospital garage alone this time, at Denise's own request, the nurse was waiting with a folder. Payroll records, Denise said, sliding it across the hood of her car. Took me 2 nights to pull these without anyone noticing I'd been in that system after hours. Caleb's been logging consulting hours for a donor liaison position that doesn't officially exist. Cash payments routed through a foundation account. Richard Hale's foundation. She met Harper's eyes. That's not a bonus. That's a kickback for bumping patients up transplant and surgery lists for donors' families. I've watched it happen twice. I wrote down dates both times, patient initials, everything I could without breaking half a dozen privacy laws myself. Will you say that's somewhere official? Denise hesitated, then nodded once, sharp. The board's voting on chief of surgery in 5 days. I'll say it there, in the room where it actually matters. Not to some HR box that disappears complaints. She looked at Harper's healing jaw. Also, I'm sorry about your face. And I'm sorry I didn't say something 8 months ago when I filed my own complaint and it went nowhere. Maybe if I had. You're saying something now, Harper said. That's the part that counts. Back at the house Nathaniel had put her up in. A small guest room, door that locked from the inside, nobody watching her come and go. Harper spread the payroll records, the watch engraving she'd sketched and described in detail to a jeweler friend of Nathaniel's who'd confirmed the engraving style matched Hale's known foundation gifts, and her own written timeline of 2 years of dates and injuries across the kitchen table. It was the first time she'd written the timeline down in full instead of just carrying it in her body. Reading it back, laid out in her own handwriting, she realized how much smaller and more survivable it looked as a list of dates than it had ever felt living through it one night at a time. 4 pieces, she said. The watch. Denise's testimony. These payroll records. And whatever proof exists that he assaulted me, which is mostly just my word and a lip that's already healing. The bartender, Nathaniel said. Marcus. He was 8 feet away. He'll be too scared to testify against a surgeon. Not if he doesn't have to testify against anyone. Just tell a hospital board what he saw in a parking lot. That's not the same as standing in a courtroom. Nathaniel paused. I know someone on the board's ethics committee. Hale isn't the only vote, and not everyone up there benefits from his foundation. I can get you 5 minutes on the agenda. You can get me 5 minutes, Harper repeated. Not do the talking for me. That's what I meant. She studied him, the restraint in his voice, the way he was asking now instead of deciding, and felt something in her chest that wasn't quite trust yet, but was closer than it had been in years. 3 years ago she had walked away from this exact man because she couldn't picture him asking permission for anything. Watching him do it now, twice in one conversation, felt like watching someone learn a language late in life, clumsy but genuinely trying. Harper folded her arms, thinking it through the way she used to plan a full dinner service in her head before the doors opened. Every table, every order, every possible complication accounted for in advance. "There's a boundary I need," she said. "If I do this, if I stand in that boardroom, you don't come in with your men. You don't threaten anyone. If Caleb comes near me after, you let me handle the first move, and you back me up, not the other way around." Nathaniel was quiet a long moment. "If he touches you again, then it becomes a police matter, with a paper trail 3 years too late in coming but finally real. Not a matter you handle in a parking lot." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" "It's not what I'm built for." "I know. Do it anyway." He exhaled, some old certainty visibly loosening in him. "All right. I'll be in the room. I won't be the one talking." That evening, Caleb texted again. 3 days left before the vote, the lease deadline the same day. "Come home, Harper. Whatever you think you're doing, it ends badly for your family, not me. I always win these." Harper read it twice, then set the phone face down on the table, next to the folder of payroll records and a photograph of a watch engraved with 2 letters that had cost a man his conscience. "He's already lost," she said quietly. "He just doesn't know it's this room, this vote, 5 days from now." Nathaniel looked at the folder, then at her. "You're not hiding from him anymore." "No," Harper said. "I called you because I needed someone to get me out of danger. I'm asking you now to help me walk back into a room and finish it. That's different. I need you to understand it's different." "I do," he said, and for the first time since the truck had pulled into that parking lot, he sounded like he meant it completely. The night before the board meeting, Nathaniel drove Harper past the restaurant just to see the lights still on, the open sign still glowing in the window despite everything. They sat in the truck across the street for a while, not talking about Caleb or the board or the folder, just watching her father move between tables through the front glass, refilling water glasses, oblivious to how close he'd come to losing everything he'd built. "He doesn't know how close it got," Harper said quietly. "Do you want him to?" "Eventually. Not tonight." She watched her mother laugh at something a customer said. "Tonight I just want to remember what we're protecting, before tomorrow gets complicated." Nathaniel didn't reach for her hand, didn't fill the silence with reassurance he wasn't sure he could back up. He just sat with her, watching the restaurant glow warm against the dark street, and let the quiet be enough. 5 days. 1 hospital boardroom. 1 folder of proof, 1 nurse willing to speak, 1 bartender who'd seen more than he'd wanted to, and 1 waitress who had spent her whole life reading rooms for a living, about to walk into the most important one of her life. The St. Aldrich Memorial Boardroom held 12 members around a long oval table, Richard Hale at its head. Caleb seated 2 chairs down in a suit Harper recognized because she'd once ironed it. Sunlight came through tall windows onto a table so polished Harper could see her own reflection in it, distorted and pale, waiting for her turn. Her hands were steadier than she expected. Years of carrying overloaded trays through packed dinner rushes had taught her something about pressure that no one in this room could have guessed just by looking at her. That panic was manageable if you focused on the next single plate, the next single sentence, instead of the whole room at once. She stood at the back of the room until it was her turn, Nathaniel a few feet behind her near the door. Not beside her, not in front, exactly where she'd asked him to be. Denise sat 3 rows over. Marcus, the bartender, sat beside her, looking terrified and present, which was all Harper had asked of him. "Chief of Surgery is a significant appointment," Hale was saying, when Harper's name was finally called from the public comment list. "We appreciate the community's interest, but I'll remind everyone this is a personnel matter best handled with discretion." "With respect," Harper said, walking to the small podium they'd set up near the table, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Discretion is exactly how this got as far as it did." Caleb's face didn't move, but his knuckles went white against the arm of his chair. "My name is Harper Voss. I'm Caleb Voss's wife." She let that settle a moment. "4 nights ago, at my sister's engagement dinner, my husband struck me in a parking lot and threatened to have my parents' restaurant lease terminated if I told anyone. That happened. I have photographs of the injury, time-stamped that same night. A murmur moved through the room. Hale's expression stayed carefully neutral, but two board members exchanged a glance. "That's a private matter," Caleb said smoothly, standing halfway. "And frankly, an unstable one. My wife has been under significant stress." "I'm not finished," Harper said, and something in her voice made him sit back down. "That night, I also saw a watch on my husband's wrist. Engraved to CV for making room. RH." She looked directly at Richard Hale for the first time. "I didn't understand what that meant at first. Then Nurse Denise Marsh explained it to me." She nodded toward Denise, who stood spine straight and didn't wait to be invited. "I've been charge nurse in the ER for 6 years, Denise said, voice carrying clearly across the room despite the visible effort it took her to stand there at all. "I've personally witnessed Dr. Voss reprioritize surgical and transplant scheduling for patients connected to Mr. Hale's foundation donors. Twice, with dates I documented at the time, both times bumping patients with more urgent clinical need down the list. I filed an internal complaint 8 months ago, through the proper channel, in writing. It was closed without action within a week, and I was told informally to let it go if I wanted to keep my position." She set a folder on the table. "These are payroll records showing cash consulting payments to Dr. Voss routed through the Hale Family Foundation for a liaison position that does not exist in this hospital's org chart." Hale's composure cracked for the first time. A tightening around the eyes, a hand that moved toward the folder and then stopped, aware of the room watching. Caleb stood fully now, smoothing his tie, falling back on the same measured authority he used with worried families in the ER. "Board members, I understand how this looks, but reprioritization decisions in emergency medicine are complex, made under pressure, and often second-guessed by people without the clinical training to understand them. I'd ask you to consider the source of these allegations before." "This is unsubstantiated," Caleb said, tone shifting, too fast now to sound as composed as he wanted. "A disgruntled employee and an estranged wife." "I'm not estranged," Harper said. "I'm standing right here. And there's one more thing." She looked at Marcus. "Ask the bartender who was 8 feet away in that parking lot what he saw." Marcus stood, hands shaking, and gave a short, plain account. No embellishment, just what he'd seen and heard through the side door before it swung shut. Took less than a minute. It was enough. Caleb's carefully built calm finally broke. He stood fully this time, jaw tight, voice rising. "You have no idea what you're destroying. 2 years of my career, a position this hospital needs filled by someone competent. You destroyed it," Harper said quietly. "The first time you decided controlling me mattered more than being someone worth trusting." The room went silent in a way Harper would remember for the rest of her life. Not empty silence, but the specific silence of a dozen people recalculating everything they thought they knew, glancing sideways at each other instead of at the front of the room, the way people do when a story they've told themselves for years suddenly stops holding together. One of the younger board members, a woman Harper didn't recognize, was already pulling a legal pad toward her and writing something down in quick, decisive strokes. Another board member, an older man who'd said nothing until now, leaned forward toward Hale. "Richard, if there's a foundation account involved here, I think you understand you can't be the one presiding over this decision." Hale's face went carefully blank, but he gave a single tight nod and pushed his chair back from the head of the table, ceding the floor without another word. The vice chair took over, cleared her throat, and looked down the table at the assembled members before speaking. "Given the severity of what's been presented, I don't think we have any responsible choice but to pause today's proceedings entirely." She turned to address the room directly. "The board will suspend today's vote pending a formal investigation into both the misconduct allegations and the scheduling irregularities. Dr. Voss, you're relieved of clinical duties effective immediately, pending review." "This is absurd," Caleb said, but his voice had gone thin, and 2 security staff were already stepping toward the door at Hale's small nod. He turned toward Harper as they approached him, and for one moment his mask dropped entirely. No performance left, just fury, raw and childish and finally visible to everyone in the room. "You'll regret this," he said. "I regret a lot of things," Harper said. "Not this." Nathaniel didn't move from his spot by the door, didn't step forward, didn't say a word. Exactly as promised. He watched Caleb get escorted out with his hands loose at his sides, and Harper understood, watching him hold that stillness, exactly what it was costing him not to act. Afterward in the hallway, the noise of the boardroom still audible through the closing door. Hale's voice, tight and formal, already discussing next procedural steps with someone from legal. Denise squeezed Harper's arm on her way out. "I'm filing a formal restraining order request today. For what it's worth. You should too." "I'm going to." Marcus lingered, awkward, and finally just said, "I'm glad you're okay," before hurrying off toward the elevators. Harper stood alone in the hospital corridor for a moment, the folder gone, the watch photograph submitted into an official record. 3 years of silence finally spent on something that mattered. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. Not in front, not behind. Beside. "You did that," he said. "Not me. You got me in the room. You did the rest." He looked at her, careful, like he was still learning the new shape of what she needed from him. "What do you need now?" Harper thought about the question longer than it probably warranted, because nobody had asked her that plainly in longer than she could remember. "Right now," she said, "I need to go tell my parents the restaurant's lease is safe, and that I'm safe, and that I'm not going home to an empty house tonight either way." "I can drive you." "I know," Harper said. "Ask me first next time. That's all." "I will," Nathaniel said, and for the first time, she believed him completely. 6 weeks later, Rose's kitchen was still open, the zoning complaint against it quietly withdrawn once the hospital's investigation made the local news and nobody wanted their name anywhere near Caleb Voss's. Caleb was formally terminated from St. Aldrich Memorial 2 weeks after the board meeting. His medical license under state review, a restraining order active and, this time actually enforced, filed properly, documented properly, a paper trail 3 years too late but finally real. Richard Hale resigned from the board a month later, quietly, the way powerful men do when discretion stops being an option. St. Aldrich Memorial created a new anonymous reporting line for staff misconduct that quarter. The nurses on the floor started calling it informally Denise's line, after the woman who'd finally been believed. Denise herself got a formal promotion to nursing supervisor, and her boyfriend's shop got a new sign paid for by a very quiet, very anonymous cash gift that he never asked too many questions about. Harper moved in with Delilah for 2 months, long enough to finish her own divorce filing, long enough to sleep through a full night without flinching at the sound of a car door. She still worked at Rose's kitchen. Her mother had offered, more than once, to let her take fewer shifts. Harper always said no. Carrying 4 plates through a crowded room had taught her to read danger long before it hit. And now, for the first time in years, she was the one who decided when to walk toward it and when to walk away. Nathaniel didn't disappear, and he didn't move in either. He called first. He asked before he showed up at the restaurant, asked before he offered to drive her anywhere, asked, once, haltingly, if she'd want to get coffee somewhere that had nothing to do with danger or rescue or debt. He said yes. It was, by a wide margin, the most ordinary conversation they'd ever had. No trucks, no folders, no threats, just 2 people arguing gently about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. He was still Nathaniel Cross. The docks were still the docks. Harper hadn't asked him to become someone else, and he hadn't offered to pretend. What had changed was smaller and harder than a transformation. He asked now where he used to decide. He waited where he used to move first. It cost him something every time, and Harper had learned to recognize the cost in his face and to thank him for paying it anyway. One evening, her phone rang while she was closing out the register. Nathaniel's name on the screen. 3 years ago, a ringing phone from a man like that would have meant danger arriving. 4 months ago, it had meant 17 minutes standing between her and a parking lot floor. Tonight, it just meant Nathaniel, asking if she'd already eaten dinner. She answered on the second ring, the same way she always had. Except this time, there was nothing to be afraid of on the other end. Here's what this story is really about. Harper didn't need someone to hide her from danger. She needed someone who would show up when she called, and then step back far enough to let her fight for herself. Real protection isn't about being kept safe from the world by someone stronger. It's about being trusted to stand in the room and speak, with people willing to stand beside you instead of in front of you. Nathaniel's love for Harper was real, even at its most dangerous. But it only became something worth keeping once he learned that protecting someone and controlling them are not the same thing, and that the bravest thing he could do for her wasn't erasing her problems, but letting her solve them herself. So here's the question worth sitting with. If the person protecting you also insists on making every hard decision for you, is that really safety or just a different kind of control? Would you have told Nathaniel to stand down the way Harper did, even knowing it meant a slower, harder fight? Or would you have let him handle it his way? Let me know what you'd have done down in the comments. And if this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more.